Hello everyone, it's Tim here again at Seagar City Garage. I want to talk about another rear suspension. This will be video number 2. I showed you the Falcon last week. This week I'm going to show you a little bit on this Henry J, or these two Henry J's I'm building, and a little bit why I'm doing it. You know, is it right, is it wrong? I don't know. It's how I'm doing it. I've done it this way a long time, so hopefully some of these tips will help you guys out and making decisions on building your car. And that's the key there. Plan this stuff first. You need to plan what you're doing, plan ahead as far as you can. You know, me, I've been doing this a long time, so I've got, you know, reasons why I do different things, and I'm trying my best to explain them to you. And at some point I'll be able to answer more questions and stuff like that as we go along. But, you know, let me share a little bit of this with you and see if it helps at all. Here goes nothing. As you well know, there's the Falcon over there. I showed you that one. It's got a 36 or 32 inch ladder bar in it. Bars they had. The reason why I use those bars is, you can tell the motor's way far out in that car. Still a manual tranny car, but it's only 500 horsepower. It doesn't have a lot of power, okay? Now this heap here, this 51 Henry J, it's going to have about a 900 horse engine in it. Okay, so my decision there was to use a 42 inch bar. You can see them there, 42 inch ladder bar, to take some of the hit out of the suspension. The longer the bar, the less hard it hits the tire. So, you know, if you're running a 400 horse engine, run a 32 inch bar. You know, if you're running 600, 36, but longer than that, any more than that, try to go around 40 to 42 inches. And really, don't run them long ladder bars. I've seen guys that got ladder bars that go all the way up to the bell housing. Those are stupid, and all that is asking for an accident. It's asking for something to bend. These bars in this car I built myself. They're actually 1.25 inch chromoly, 120 wall tubing, and I've got a diagonal brace in the back. I've seen a bunch of them out there, guys selling this stuff that's made out of 1.25 inch 058 tubing. Don't run them, they'll bend, you know. I recommend, like if you're running longer bars, Checkered Racing in southern Indiana, they have a great ladder bar package. The smaller stuff, like 32 inch stuff, I use Chassis Engineering. I've been a dealer for them forever. They're friends of mine, you know, probably why I recommend it. But S&W, there's lots of guys out there that make good ladder bars, so that's why I run these longer ones, is because this thing is going to be a lot higher horsepower car, you know. The other Henry J, it won't be as high as this, but I'm trying to build two identical cars for these guys, and I'll show you a little bit about what I'm talking about, how I'm doing that with this car. But some of the things I want to talk about in the rear suspension, okay? Ladder bars, mount in the front the same way. I like find the bumper, the center of the bumper in the front, string line from the tire to the bumper, and that tells me where my instant center point, adjustment point, should be. Now when this car's done, I've got that in the center over there. It'll probably be a little bit lower, but for, you know, all intents and purposes for building the car, center of the adjustment works pretty good. So on this car, I'm going to move back here a little bit and show you some of the back there. I've put my spring mounts on the back side of the housing. The reason why I've done that with this car versus the way I did it on the Falcon is that a lot higher horsepower and a lot shorter wheelbase. As I said in the previous video, the farther out you get your suspension mounting points, such as your springs and your ladder bars and everything else to the outside of the car, the more stable it's going to be. Okay, so I put these behind the housing, and as far out, I mean, you can see the upper spring cups are almost to the outside edge of the frame rail, as far out as I could get them on this one. And if you'll notice, the ladder bars are on the inside of the rails versus the Falcon were underneath, and that's because these are longer bars and the dip in the rail comes so much farther back in this car. These rails were designed, I believe, for like a Nova Camaro install, your first gen Nova Camaro. I was trying to use something that they had readily available that had the right curve to get me back into the bumper area. As you can tell, I had to notch this frame a little bit and put a fish plate on it to get it to where I needed it to be, like in the rear valance area. So I use these rails. So if I had put the ladder bars underneath the frame rail, you can see they'd have hit the frame rail. So I couldn't do that. They had to be inside, which is not a problem, but just keep them as far out as you can get them so that you can get the bolts and the nuts in and out, and you can weld them too. If you'll notice, like on these brackets, I've got them out a ways. You know, I've probably got 2 inches between them, 2 1/4 inches. That's so I could get in there to weld them. You know, I've seen guys get them right tight and then you're sort of stuck there. You can't weld them. And I also add gussets to them. You can see on the top of this one, I've got a little gusset in the top. That adds a ton of strength. You have to do that. And on the housing, if you look, I've got it gusseted too. Front, back, top, adds a ton of strength to it. It doubles the strength of the bracket. So when you're doing that, take the extra time to do it. Panda rods. I didn't get to talk about this in the Falcon. Just wasn't there so much going on. Make them as long as you can. On these cars, I'm using a Panda rod because most of the rules dictate that. If I was building something like my 55, I got a big track locator in that thing. I'll show you that in a minute. So, but Panda rod, the longer you make them, the better they are, because it swings in less of a radius. When it goes up and down, you know, these things, when they go up and down, they swing in an arc like this, and it, like as it goes down, it will pull the rear end over to the left side of the car. And I use a short radius rod. I've seen them pull the rear end over 1.5 inches. Puts everything in a bind, just not good. So the longer you can make them like this one, the better you are. You can see that bracket I've got up front there. It's got a lot of gusset in it. The Falcon didn't, and I have to put a tubing gusset in that to help support it. But side loads are pretty tough on this thing, so make sure you build a good brace and make it as long as possible. So another thing is trying to keep it as parallel as possible to the axle center line, side to side, because once it's put in the car, you try to keep it as level as possible at what we call half travel. Halfway through the suspension travel, you want this thing level so that you're not just pulling the rear end to the left as the rear end comes down. You sort of want it to swing through that arc at half travel. So if that makes any sense to you, I'm hoping it does. Also on this, you notice I put adjustable shock mounts on this. I'll put like double adjustable AFCOs on the back of this, shock only, just so that we can control the rear suspension. I'm a big advocate for AFCO stuff. They've been great to me. Great products in my opinion for what you're buying. You can go out there and buy a $3,000 shock absorber, but what we're building, you don't need that. You don't need those real fancy Penske's. Nothing against Penske, because those guys are great and make a great product for what they do, but this kind of car, not necessary. Like if you saw in the Falcon, I just used the 3-way adjustable shocks on the back of that because that's what he had. But I can put a 7-inch stroke AFCO on the back of it if I have to. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense for you. Usually a real high horsepower car, I'll put a back brace on the housing. I just didn't do it on this one because the other car don't have one. Like I say, trying to make identical cars here. And up front, I talked a little bit about this. I don't know how well you can see it, but I'm building a saddle to go underneath the motor. It's like right there. Looks sort of like some of them Speedway universal mounts. It's not completely done, but I will weld nut inserts into the frame and bolt that piece in, and that's so that we can make the car universal. I can take that thing out and build the new one. Say if he wants to put a small block Ford in it, we can do that. Sort of what I'm doing with this thing, trying to make it a little bit more stable. Typically with something this much power, I would put a motor plate in it, but again, I'm trying to build a car that's universal. They can do whatever they want to do, and both cars will be the same way. Next week I'm going to talk about front suspension. on this car and the Falcon, give you some ideas of why I do what I do, things to look for, build my own steering arm. So like I was talking on the 55 big track locator, that's an 1 1/4 120 wall chromoly tube, 5/8 by 3/4 Heims. I'm going to street drive this one some, so that's why I did that. But if the class don't mandate it, this is a good option here for keeping the rear end from going side to side. In my Chevy 2 back in the back, I've got a wishbone in it and an anti-roll. Highly recommend them if you can get them in, and if you have the ability. If you're a first-time builder or new to it, do this. This is simple. You can buy a kit, but buy the big ones. Don't buy one with a 1/2-inch bar in it, because it'll bend on you. So anywho, I'm hoping that gives you a little bit of help there as you make decisions building your cars. And like I say, next week I'm going to talk about front suspension. As you can see in this one, I've started putting the pedals in it already, and I'm going to share some of that stuff too. So there's several ways to do that. This is just one of them, how I do it. So hopefully that helps y'all, gives you some ideas. Thanks for watching.